Thanks everybody for joining us this evening. We've got folks in person and folks at home, and we're going to talk about balancing diets. I know we've got some folks that are brand new to DAC and may not have heard any of this before. And then we've also got a lot of people that have heard me or are very familiar with DAC. So what we're going to do, what I did with this originally was I started out looking at forage testing because really that is the most important part of any horse's diet is the hay that you feed them. That is the largest part of the horse's diet. So I got they're actually all pretty good quality hays, a grass hay from Michigan, a mixed alfalfa grass hay from Indiana, a Western alfalfa, and then there were a couple of local feeds being manufactured that I was specifically asked to investigate. They were being touted for all of their benefits. And so I just did a little digging and put them in our ration balancing program and saw how, with a really decent quality hay, how these would stack up and build a diet. So that's what we went through, and we will go through that again this evening. But I want to first start out with when I send a forage away to get a forage test, these are the kind of variables that we're going to look at in that hay test. First of all, we're going to look at the dry matter and the moisture content. If the moisture content is above, say, 15%, then we know that that hay was baled damp and it has the potential to mold. And we know that in cattle, that's not a big deal, but in horses, horses are really susceptible to mycotoxin poisoning. So we would want to make sure that that hay was dried properly and not have a high moisture content. Now I'm going to look at the crude protein value. This is going to start to show us an idea of the nutrient value. When we look at most grass hays are going to sit, ideally going to sit between 8 to 14% crude protein. And a mixed hay is going to sit between 12 to 16%. And alfalfa hays are typically going to be greater than 16% crude protein. Now, I live on the East Coast and we don't always have the best quality hay available to us. And so I've seen some local grass hays that run between 5 and 7% crude protein, which is pretty low. Adf and Ndf are measures of fiber fractions. So ADF stands for acid detergent fiber, but really it's a measure of digestibility in that hay sample. So somebody might come to me and say, well, I have a hay and my horses eat plenty of it, but they seem to be losing weight. I'm pretty sure that the ADF value will be pretty high because as that value goes up, the digestibility of that hay goes down. NDF, or neutral detergent fiber, that's really a measure of palatability. You know, we have a lot of first cutting hays that people will say, my horse really doesn't like first cutting hay, he doesn't like to eat it. Chances are, if I look at that hay report, the NDF values will be pretty high because it's not very palatable to horses. Now, with these two values being high, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for a horse. Let's say we have a fat pony that we just need to feed it fiber, but it doesn't need to get a lot of nutrition out of it, then high ADF and NDF values aren't a problem. But if we're feeding a lactating broodmare or a buggy horse or a performance horse that's hard to keep weight on, then we want to make sure that these two values are low. Obviously, we understand that calcium and phosphorus are minerals and they're really important in the diet, but the ideal ratio of calcium to phosphorus in the horse's total diet is 2 to 1. We always want 2 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus, and we never, ever, ever want the phosphorus to be in higher quantities than the calcium. And why that is so is because if you put too much phosphorus in the diet, it will actually bind up calcium, the calcium that's in the diet. But horses are really smart and they will get nutrients from their body even if we don't supply them. So what'll happen is they'll actually suck calcium out of their bones, and then they'll get these spongy bones There are other different chemicals that can also cause that, but it's really detrimental to horses. Potassium, obviously, if you've got horses with HYPP, this is a quarter horse disease where it's a genetic abnormality where they cannot process potassium, high amounts of potassium in the diet. So we'd want to make sure that potassium was low in those diets. So alfalfa is naturally very high in potassium. Magnesium, another mineral. Fat is also always going to be very low in a forage sample. If you see ash, it's really you just burn all of the organic matter and it's what's left over. It's the mineral content of the sample. Then we're also going to look at the sugar and starch content. If we have a horse that says has tying up, has azoturia, or is carbohydrate sensitive, let's say it's got a cresty neck or it's laminitic, we're going to want to keep the sugars and the starches in the diet low. It's a combination of both of those that we want to keep less than 10%. So the sugar plus the starch in a horse that has these disorders, the total diet needs to be less than 10% sugars and starches combined. And then finally, the digestible energy is the measure of energy that we use in horses. It's the amount of calories in the sample. So the higher the calorie content, the more energy available for performance, for body weight gain, etc. So let's start out, we'll look at the Michigan grass hay. And if we look at the different fractions that I pointed out, now this one really doesn't have the best protein values here. We're only at about 7%. Now I'm looking at this as sample column versus the dry matter. So you'll see those values aren't very different because this hay was very high in dry matter and very low in moisture anyway. So I look at the as sampled values because that's what the horse is actually eating. To get the dry matter values, we literally put the sample in the oven and suck all of the moisture out of it. So it's 100% dry matter and 0% moisture, and then we get those values. So they're always going to be a little higher. That's not what the horse is actually eating. So the crude protein is about 7%. So that's on the lower end for a local grass hay. The Adf and the Ndf values. So remember, the Adf was a measure of digestibility, and Ndf is a measure of palatability. And if the digestibility, the Adf value, is above 38% on a dry matter value, and the Ndf is above 47% on a dry matter value, then we're going to start to see decreases in digestibility and palatability. So this hay is pretty digestible, but it wouldn't surprise me if horses turned their nose up at it a little bit. You can see it's got quite a bit of stem in it. You can see it's mature. It's got some seed head in it. So those fiber fractions are pretty high. When we combine the carbohydrates, so we're looking at the sugars here, this WSC value and starch, we're going to combine those and have a combined sugar and starch value of about 11, 12, 13.8. So a little outside the range for that horse that is really sugar and starch sensitive. But we could soak this hay and get it down to less than 10%. This is not going to be a stellar hay for a horse that needs to gain a lot of weight. You can see that the calcium is higher than the phosphorus, so that's always good to see. Now, if we look at the Indiana mixed hay. So now we can see a lot less stem. There's a lot more leaf in here. We don't see any seed head, but you can see here this lime green. You can see some alfalfa stalks in there, but I don't see a lot of alfalfa leaf. But we've got that nice leafy grass hay. Now, what I'll say is it's actually very hard to find a really good mixed hay because alfalfa and grasses mature at different rates. So what I always tell people is buy a good quality bale of alfalfa and buy a good quality bale of grass hay and mix the two on your own, because every horse in your barn could have a different blend of those two. That's if you want to feed alfalfa. But the stems are bringing in, the alfalfa is bringing in a higher protein content. So We're now looking at a 14% crude protein value because it is a mixed hay. It's got some of that alfalfa that's going to drive the protein content up. The Adf and Ndf values, we're still, it's going to be pretty digestible. We're a little bit better on the palatability values, but this still may not be 100% palatable for some horses. The sugars and starches, we're looking at the water-soluble carbohydrates and the starch. If we add those two values together, we're at 8.7. So this hay perfectly fits into our less than 10% for those horses that might have tying up, sore muscles, need to keep the sugars and starches low. Oops, I also wanted to point out that the calcium and phosphorus, while the ratio is much closer, we're at 0.45% calcium and 0.36% phosphorus, we're still got more calcium than phosphorus, so I'm totally fine with this. The Western alfalfa, you can see now this has got a lot more leaf. You can see some stem, but a lot more leaf in there. And now we're looking at 21% crude protein. The Adf and Ndf values are 20. If we go over to the dry matter column, they're 30 and 38 respectively. So this is going to be very palatable and very digestible. And it's also why you'll find that some horses, when they're on 100% alfalfa, will develop diarrhea because it is so digestible. They might even also start chewing wood because they're just craving some of that non-digestible fiber. So I always like to have a mix of both. If we look at the water-soluble carbohydrates plus starch, we've got, look at 7.4 combined. So again, we've got really low sugars and starches, so that's ideal. Now, we know that alfalfa is very high in calcium, so we're looking at 1.1% calcium versus 0.36% phosphorus. And we're right out, so we're outside that 2-to-1 range, but in adult horses, we can get as high as 5-to-1 calcium phosphorus ratio, as long as we don't have an inverted ratio of too much phosphorus to calcium. That is where we run into problems. So we can be as low as 1-to-1, and we can be as high as 5-to-1, but we never want to be, say, 1-to-2, for example. So now I want to show you and we'll look at a graph like this in several of the other slides. So I'll orient you to it. Along the bottom, we've got digestible energy, crude protein, calcium, phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, iodine, lysine, vitamin A, and vitamin E. And these are all really, really critical nutrients in the horse's diet. We want to make sure that every one of these bars touches this red line at 100%. So if they touch that line, so you can see manganese is just a little bit above that line, which means that about 105% of the manganese requirement has been met in this horse's diet. So that's good. We're a little low on protein and we're a little low on energy. We're much lower on calcium, phosphorus, copper, zinc, and selenium. You can see we've only got about probably for 45% the zinc that this horse needs in the diet. So it's why when we just feed our horses hay or pasture and we don't feed them an extra vitamin and mineral supplement, even if the horse is doing nothing, the diet will be unbalanced, and then that can impact their immune system, their overall health. So we do want to make sure that we're always adding an extra vitamin and mineral supplement. So we're taking this grass hay, and the horse is 1,200 pounds. He's doing no exercise, and I recommend that horses eat between 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight in fiber per day. So we're going to do 2%. That'd be 24 pounds of hay. So at 24 pounds of hay, we've gone through and we've said, okay, the only thing that is actually being met in this horse's diet is manganese. So we need to add some additional vitamins and minerals to this diet in order for it to be balanced. Let's look at a different hay and see if we can change the narrative. So if we looked at the mixed hay, the Indiana mixed hay, and fed the same horse doing no exercise 24 pounds of hay per day, you can see, well, it had a lot more protein. This horse isn't doing anything. So now we're meeting the protein, calcium, phosphorus, manganese, and lysine requirements in this horse's diet, but we're still deficient in copper, zinc, selenium, iodine, vitamin A, and vitamin E, and deficient in energy. Now, if this horse was an easy keeper, the fact that it's deficient in energy doesn't bother me, or if he was overweight. But if he was a hard keeper and thin, then we would also need to be supplying some extra energy to the diet. The Western alfalfa. Now, alfalfa, it's pretty rare that someone would feed alfalfa, 100% alfalfa to a horse doing nothing. But let's just say we were a same 1,200-pound horse doing nothing, eating 24 pounds of a really good quality alfalfa. Now you can see we're far exceeding his crude protein, his calcium, his phosphorus, his lysine, and he's pretty much meeting his energy requirements, but still on what we would consider a really good quality hay, copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, and iodine, all vitamin A and vitamin E are deficient in this diet. So we need to make sure that we're supplying those in the diet. And even people that are fertilizing are not going to change the soil profile enough that the hay would have enough copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, iodine in it. So let's take a look at the first of the grain samples that I was asked to investigate. Now, I'm not giving names. In your group afterwards, Everett can chat to you about these particular grains, but it's pretty common if you have a local mill putting together a really inexpensive product that the characteristics are going to, that I'm going to point out, are going to be pretty similar. So what I did first is we took the tag that's on the feed bag, that is a legally binding document. And this guaranteed analysis, it's not, well, we think this is in the feed. When you put that tag on there and you guarantee that analysis, when the state feed inspector comes by your mill and takes that feed tag and takes a sample of your feed and compares the two, he sends the feed away for analysis and he compares it to your guaranteed analysis, you dang sure better make sure that they meet up. Otherwise, you are selling an illegal product. We also write our ingredient statements in order of inclusion, or that's how you're supposed to write it. So you can see on this product, corn and oats are the first two ingredients in this product. They will be in this product in the highest inclusion rate. And you can look inside this bag and see that it's predominantly corn and oats. So when I sent this feed away to the gold standard for testing labs. It's a lab called Equine in New York, and everybody sends their feed and forage samples there to be tested. This is what came back. First thing I'll point out, okay, so on the guaranteed analysis, it has a minimum and maximum for calcium, where the minimum is 0.5% and the maximum is 1.5%. This feed came back at 0.41, so below the minimum. And it is outside of the range that would be acceptable. So the state feed inspector would not consider this an acceptable. That's why on certain minerals, because we know that they can be variability, that we give a minimum and maximum, but it has to stay within that minimum and maximum. And the reason is when we design feeding directions, we're assuming that in 3 pounds that you feed this horse, that it's going to have at least 0.5% of calcium. So I'm going to design the feeding directions based on that so that he gets enough calcium in his diet. If we look at the phosphorus is guaranteed at 0.75 and it came back at 0.42. So now we've got a situation where the calcium to phosphorus ratio is inverted. There's more phosphorus than calcium. This is unacceptable. And the minimum amount on the guaranteed analysis is set at 0.75 and we're at 0.52. So we're, significantly lower in the actual test for this product. Zinc, the minimum test value is on the guaranteed analysis was 15 parts per million, and it came back at 45. So it's still above the minimum, but that's significantly above. We usually think that it's going to be, I would say, a minimum of 15 and a maximum of, say, 30. So copper, the minimum is 6 parts per million, and it came back at 10 parts per million, so considerably higher. This is where this feed for me really starts to stand out as, a red flag. All of those I can, kind of get over, but this one here, the non-structural carbohydrates, even if your horse has nothing wrong with it, let's say it's a buggy horse and it works really hard and it can tolerate a lot of sugars and starches in its diet, this is excessive. So the water-soluble carbohydrates, or the sugars, is 5. The starch is 40.9. So if you add those two together, now we're looking at 46.3% sugars and starches. The first thing that this person has come to me and said when they're feeding this feed is, my wife's been driving my buggy horse and it is out of control. How do I get her to drive it better? It ain't nothing wrong with your wife driving the buggy horse. It is that this feed is rocket fuel. And this is literally what I would feed a racehorse. This is going to, over time, be detrimental to gut health. And you're feeding, the recommended amount is 3 to 4 pounds morning and evening for a 1,200-pound horse, along with quality hay. So you're going to be feeding 6 to 8 pounds a day of this feed. That's like nearly 3.5 pounds of actual sugars and starches that you're feeding this horse per day. So that's not a great idea. So let's take that feed and we'll go back and we'll flip-flop, and instead of putting in the hay, what are we getting out of just this feed? This horse is 1,200 pounds. He's not doing any exercise, and we're feeding it the 6 pounds a day, the minimum amount that the feeding directions said to feed. And you can see that we're significantly deficient on all of the nutrients, but that's okay because we don't ever design the feeding directions that we're just going to feed this product. We're always going to add hay to it. Let's say the horse is doing moderate exercise. He's a buggy horse, or he's a barrel racing horse that's in lower levels, or a hunter horse that is going to shows on most weekends. He's 1,200 pounds doing moderate exercise, and now you can see that 6 pounds of this particular feed is meeting even less of the requirement. So we're going to have a pretty dang good hay to bring this diet up to that 100% line. What if we feed him 8 pounds? He's not doing any exercise. Now we've got plenty of selenium in the diet. The phosphorus is getting close, but the calcium, the energy, the protein, everything else is way off. Moderate exercise, 8 pounds of this feed, and again, now we're deficient in everything again. We're going to add hay to the diet. So let's do that. Let's look at this more realistically and take that Michigan grass hay and feed him 2% of his body weight, so 24 pounds of the grass hay. He's not doing any exercise, and he's eating 8 pounds of this sweet feed. I just went straight for 8 pounds because if his diet isn't balanced at 8 pounds, then it's not obviously going to be met at 6 pounds. So if you're feeding 24 pounds of your pretty standard grass hay and 8 pounds of this particular sweet feed, which I put in the actual values that were on the report, the report that came back from the testing lab. And we can see that copper and zinc are significantly deficient. Iodine, vitamin A, and vitamin E are all deficient. if we look at the horse doing moderate exercise and we feed it the 24 pounds of grass hay and 8 pounds of sweet feed, now we're looking at calcium being deficient, copper, zinc, iodine, vitamin A, and vitamin E all being deficient. So how much do we actually have to feed to balance this diet? And you're thinking, well, you know, you would look at this horse and you would probably think it looked fine because it has plenty of energy in its diet. And what are you going to see if your horse has plenty of energy? He's going to be fat. But what you can't see is that copper and zinc affect the cartilage, they affect the tendons. He's getting lame more than he should be. His feet aren't holding up because copper and zinc are really important for hoof quality. They're important for coat quality, immune function, muscle function. Okay, so let's feed more than I would ever want to feed this horse. Let's feed him 30 pounds of hay. Let's give him even more hay. Let's feed him 15 pounds of this sweet feed. And still, iodine, vitamin A, and vitamin E were deficient in this horse's diet. So, you know, this feed might have been inexpensive to purchase, but in order to make it fit the needs of your horse, even a horse just doing moderate exercise, you're going to have to buy another vitamin mineral supplement to top dress on top of this. And some minerals and vitamins are going to be way in excess just to meet the others. So, you know, when you look at feeding horses, look at how much it costs to feed per horse, per head per day. And if you've got to add a lot of different extra ingredients to make the diet work, it starts to add up. So how about you pick a couple of simple ingredients and they do all the work for you. So let's look at that diet. So we'll take that same 1,200-pound horse doing moderate exercise and we'll feed him 24 pounds of that, very average grass hay and 6 pounds of oats because that's going to give him calories. Now, if this horse had issues with tying up with azoturia, then you would swap that out for, say, beet pulp pellets or alfalfa pellets, maybe some other kind of forage pellet that you could carry the mineral on, and 3 ounces of DAC orange, just 3 scoops of DAC orange, and you can see this diet is perfect. There is nothing in excess, and there's not one of those bars that is not touching that 100% line. Now, everything is supplied perfectly. Calcium, phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, iodine, lysine, vitamin A, and vitamin E, all critical in the diet and all met by a very, very simple diet. Plus, this diet is not going to have excessive sugars and starches. So your barrel horse is going to keep focus, your buggy horse is going to keep focus, but have enough calories for a day's worth of exercise. Now let's look at that same sweet feed because, well, maybe you have better quality hay than that grass hay that I was showing, and so it works better for you. Well, 24 pounds of the mixed hay, which had much higher calories and protein, sure, this horse is doing nothing, so it's meeting more of the horse's requirements, but at 8 pounds, it's still not touching the copper, zinc, or iodine in this horse's diet. Moderate exercise, and again, copper, zinc, iodine, vitamin A, and vitamin E all not being met in this diet. So what's it going to take? Well, 30 pounds of this mixed hay and 15 pounds of grain, you're going to significantly increase your risk for colic and other kind of high grain associated disorders by feeding your horse 15 pounds. Not to mention, it's very cost prohibitive to be feeding a horse doing moderate exercise 15 pounds of grain per day. It's ridiculous. So again, let's look at a simple diet. 24 pounds of that mixed hay, which was a decent hay, 4 pounds of oats, because the hay was now supplying more of the calories and protein, and 2.5 ounces of orange. We could bump down the amount of orange even though the horse is still doing moderate exercise because this forage was better quality than the first one we looked at. But you feed alfalfa, and alfalfa, look, this is the cream of the crop, right? You can't get better quality hay as far as nutritional value than alfalfa. But still, with the Western alfalfa, which is considered the best hay in the world, 24 pounds and 8 pounds of sweet feed, where we're now meeting the copper requirements. We have way, way, way too much calcium for this horse doing nothing. We're still not meeting the zinc requirements or the iodine or the vitamin A. If you've got a pregnant mare, you need to make sure you've got plenty of vitamin A in the diet. It's really critical for reproductive function, as is copper and zinc. So let's look at this horse doing moderate exercise now, eating 8 pounds of this local mill mix sweet feed, 24 pounds of really expensive, fantastic quality Western alfalfa, and copper and zinc, iodine, and vitamin A are not being met in this horse's diet. So how can we meet these? Okay, we have to feed 30 pounds of alfalfa now. This is really getting cost prohibitive. 15 pounds of sweet feed, and now we've balanced this diet except for iodine and vitamin A. How can we do this more simply and more cost effectively without having to add a bunch of other supplements to balance this diet? 24 pounds of a Western alfalfa, 4 pounds of oats, and 2.5 ounces, I should say, of the DAC orange in this diet is now balanced. So there's another local product getting around that I wanted to point out. It's a pelleted feed. And, it's not just this feed, but there are some things that I want to point out in this particular product. So I did the same thing, and I took this product and I sent away a sample to Equine Analytical, and I compared it. And it matched up a lot better. So minimum crude protein is 14%. On the analysis, it was 15%. We're looking at calcium minimum, maximum 1.8 as a minimum, maximum 2.3. So we were a little below that. I can deal with this because the calcium to phosphorus ratio is at least in line. It's at least more calcium to phosphorus. The sugars and starches, whilst high, aren't out of this world rocket fuel for your horse. We're looking at 7% sugars and 17% starches. So we add those together and we're in the mid 20s, so not terrible. But what I don't like about this is if we start to look into the ingredients list, now we can start to determine the quality of a product. So I urge you always to look at your ingredients list. That's going to tell you a lot about the quality of ingredients being used. We do not feed animal fat to horses. It's unpalatable and it's unsafe. It's just not something that we ever do. This product has animal fat in it because that keeps the price down. This product is also using what we call collective terms. When you go through the DAC products, you will notice that the ingredients never change. It's called a fixed formula. So the guaranteed analysis on all of these products is always the same. There's always the same amount of calcium, the same amount of protein. But what they do with a formula like this, it's called a least cost formula, is they'll use the term like plant protein products in the ingredients list. Well, you can see at the top of my slide, that term plant protein products could actually mean any one or combination of those ingredients. So what they'll do is, so these plant protein products are used in this to feed the guaranteed analysis protein number, but depending on which one of these is the least expensive, they're going to use that week. So batch to batch to batch, the ingredients in these feeds changes. That is really bad for horses. We know that horses need their diet to stay consistent. So changing the diet is really, really a bad idea. So this product used plant protein products, grain products. You can see grain products is anything from corn to wheat to rice, molasses products, anything from cane molasses to different molasses extracts. Forage products could be anything like alfalfa meal wouldn't be bad, to ground soybean hay, which may have very, very low quality nutrition in it. So let's look at this pelleted feed. It's 1,200-pound horse doing no exercise, 6 pounds per day, and you can see that we've got some things that are really well over without the hay. But if we look at that feed, when we're exercising the horse, we've got a little bit more room that we have to make up. So again, if we add that Michigan grass hay at 2% of body weight, 24 pounds per day, to 6 pounds of this pelleted feed, whilst it's better than the sweet feed I showed you, we don't have anything super excessive, and we're only feeding 6 pounds a day of it, and pretty much everything in the diet is balanced. The zinc in this diet is not balanced. Well, if you've been following the media at all at the moment, zinc is absolutely critical for immune function and virus protection. And so this horse is deficient in zinc, so his immune function is going to go down. When you start to do some moderate exercise with this horse, he's now not getting enough zinc, not enough iodine, and not enough lysine. And lysine is the dictator of the quality of protein in the horse's diet. You know, this crude protein column could be made up with a ground up leather saddle, could make that value, but the lysine is the quality of protein that you're adding. Whoops. So let's look here at this diet. In order to get enough of the lysine in the diet, we had to feed 18 pounds of that pelleted feed, and you know it's getting a little excessive. Okay, so here was also a analogy. It's a diet that I put together. So we had a 10-year-old horse doing moderate exercise. Could be your buggy horse, could be a barrel horse, whatever. He's 1,000 pounds. He's a nice body condition score of 6. So he's got nice even coverage. This diet is supplying 2 megacals per pound. This feed that I put in here is supplying 2 megacals per pound of energy, supplying 30% crude protein, about 20% fat, 250 IUs per pound of vitamin E, 1.1% calcium, and 0.9% phosphorus. So we're feeding 20 pounds of our local grass hay. We're feeding 3 pounds of this feed that I've just described. And we put in 2 ounces of DAC orange to balance the diet. And it looks pretty dang perfect if you ask me. But this is why I want you to read the ingredients. Because this is dog food. I actually went on and I took my dog's dog food, and I took the values, energy, and the protein and the mineral content off the back of the dog food bag, and I put it into this ration balancing program. And it's really important that you read the ingredients that are going into the diet. So no collective terms. We want to know exactly what's in there. We don't want animal products. We don't want animal fat. Interpretation is key. So that is a perfect looking diet, but again, it's dog food and you wouldn't want to feed that to your horse. So I implore you to build a team that you trust. You get a good farrier, you get a good veterinarian, you get a good equine dentist. Get a good feed supplier, get a good vitamin and mineral supplier, and trust them to give you the correct information and build a good diet for your horse. And if you use a DAC product, then you can rely on myself or Dr. Duran as part of your team to help you, because it can be very overwhelming. With that, I will take any questions.